captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and I oversee the administrative section and vice narcotics.
Okay. And were you were obviously around when this ordinance was passed,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
Talk to me about what the hopes were for this chronic problem properties ordinance.
So the hopes of this ordinance were to really address those problematic businesses that just had repeat calls for service over and over again. A good example would have been, we had a bar over at Anthony and Wayne Street that we had numerous issues, shootings, fightings. The last thing that was the straw that broke the camel's back was a triple homicide. And so that ordinance was really focused to really address those issues. What we have seen though is it is such a vague law, and there are so many other provisions in it that it's really hard to enforce. And since we passed it, we have not written any violations of this ordinance.
Police backed this ordinance, right? This was something that you guys were hopeful for. Why do you think it wasn't used? Talk to me about more of those complications per se. Like, why was it so hard to enforce?
Well, one of the reasons that it is so hard to enforce is anytime there is a victim that's involved, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's a battery, whether it's anything where there's a victim and there's a crime involved, it does not apply. So that eliminates quite a few different situations that would help going forward.
Were you guys tracking these? So if there was a victim in a 90-day period, is this something you were following closely so that you could issue a citation if need be?
Yes. So, some of the problematic areas, some of the problematic hotels, we looked at that, but most of these cases have victims involved, so it doesn't apply.
So I see you have those
Yes.
records pulled. So are these the ones that don't count?
Yes, so
Okay.
the ones that are crossed off are just ones that there were no report filed. So somebody got called for something and then didn't write a report.
So that wouldn't count.
That wouldn't count
Okay.
because there was no official police action taken.
Okay.
And then the others had victims involved in the case, so it did not apply. So this is a bar on the northeast side of town that we've had multiple runs to. Again, many victims involved, and this is over a 6-month period. And then here's another hotel over, again, a 6-month period. You can see there's quite a few calls for service. And out of all of these cases, I found one that would apply.
Where you could have issued a citation?
Well, no, because, so the ordinance is 12 violations in a 90-day period. So in a 6-month period, I found one case that would apply towards that. So when we hit 6 cases in a 90-day period, we're supposed to notify that business and say, hey, look, you're close to coming in violation of this chronic problem property ordinance, and we would like you to take care of it before we cite you for it. So again, in a 90-day period or a 66-month period, there was only been one case that would apply to that.
And so like an unwanted call wouldn't go towards that?
No, I mean, think of the business as a victim if they're wanting to eject somebody that's an unwanted party.
So if that's the case, what in this ordinance needs to change so that you guys can actually enforce this and it can be used to your advantage?
Yeah, very good question. My suggestions would be, taking out the 12 violations in a 90-day period. That's a very, very high threshold. I would maybe cut that in half and then notify people after three violations in that 90 day.
Which would still be difficult,
It would,
right?
It would.
Okay.
And maybe taking out the victims or qualifying a victim, whereas if there's multiple shootings or multiple bar fights or things like that, that you would take that out. That would be my suggestion.
This is obviously something that uses up a lot of police resources. There are several spots in town that have hundreds of
Yeah.
calls in a year. Talk about, what this does for police resources. I'm sure this uses up a lot of police time and money, right?
Well, not necessarily the resource, but problematic locations that have multiple calls for service. Officers just know they're gonna get called to that on probably a daily basis, if not, more.
So what would you like to see happen going forward? Because right now the ordinance is no longer in effect. Do you guys want something along the lines of this where you could actually use and enforce and make some change? Or do you think you need to go a totally different direction?
Well, I think the thought and idea of this ordinance is good, and there are other cities, South Bend has one that has worked well for them. So we just need to tweak this and go forward. And, we're gonna have a new mayor here in the next few weeks. It'll be up to that new mayor to decide what they would like to do with this going forward.
Why do you think South Bend's works and this one doesn't?
The way I understand it, their thresholds were a little different than what ours were, and it has worked for them.
So all in all, the message is it was just too hard to enforce, and there
Yes.
weren't enough citations that you guys could actually issue a cite.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Now, we also have a disorderly house ordinance that is along the same lines as this, and that is to focus on houses that are owned by a person that may cause issues, drug dealing, disturbances and things like that. We have used that ordinance once, and that has helped with that case.
So when you say like the victim of a crime, like what would be the, I don't know how to word this, but like what kind of calls in your mind would warrant a citation for a chronic problem property call?
That's a good question, and as it stands now, there's not much that we can do with that. But to go forward, I would say, anytime that the owner is responsible for those issues or doesn't take care of those issues, like one of the problematic bars that we had, if they're allowing fights to occur on a regular basis and they're not doing anything to address that, I would believe that would be a good reason to cite for that.
What's your goal with all of this in the future? I mean, because in the ordinance originally, the goal was that the city and these places would really work together. So is that your hope going forward?
Absolutely. Anytime we can educate a business or an organization, hey, here's what's going on, here's how you can resolve these issues by doing X, Y, and Z, we would rather do that than give anybody a ticket. Because when we work together, when we collaborate, good things happen.
So this is probably going to come up again. What are you guys going to pitch for this to actually work the next time?
We'll have to review it. We'll probably go back to South Bend's ordinance and see how things are working for them to this day and go from there. And again, it's all gonna depend on a new mayor and what they wanna do going forward.
And I know when this was passed, safety was one of the main priorities. Talk about, what this means to our city to have that safety enforced.
Anytime we can enforce things that make our officers safer, make our citizens safer, things are better in the long run. So if we can reduce calls for service at a problematic location, then that's always a good thing.
And you just need something that officers can more tangibly use.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, am I missing anything that you want to add?
No. We do have a drug house ordinance that focuses on rental properties. That works very well. So let's say we buy drugs from a house, we raid the house, and there are renters in that property. We have mechanisms in place to notify the homeowner or the business owner, and then they in turn have to evict that person that was dealing the drugs renting at that property. That has worked very well. We continue to use that on a regular basis.
Okay, great, thank you. Can I have a copy of
Sure.
these?
Actually, you can
Okay.